Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have a very special guest, Aaron Hurst. Aaron is a Renaissance man. He is in lots of different things. But his claim to fame is that he started this amazing organization called Taproot, which changed the way in which we think about volunteerism coming out of corporations. From that, he wrote the book, The Purpose Economy, where he believes that this is the age of purpose. We've gone through the agricultural economy, to the industrial economy, to the knowledge-based economy, and now we are living in the purpose economy. And Aaron was the one who actually came up with the title for my book, Purpose Mindset. So I'm eternally grateful to Aaron. So, Aaron, welcome to Living with Purpose.
I'm excited to be here. Anytime I have a chance to talk to you, I look forward to it.
So I want to just start off by having you share your journey. You had this fascinating journey. You've got this amazing network of people that you've grown up around. So share a little bit about your journey for our audience so they can understand how you have got to where you are today.
I think a lot of my journey around purpose is just because I come from a family where that was the expectation. And I realize how much of a privilege that is. I meet a lot of people where that wasn't at all part of the narrative or the role modeling of their families. And I had the good fortune of having that. My grandfather, who really is sort of the role model in our family, was one of the first naval officers in Hitler's bunk at the end of the war. And as part of the US military, was a big part of rebuilding Germany. And seeing all that destruction and seeing what happens when people do not sort of trust each other and operate out of fear, he made it his life goal to prevent World War III. That was sort of what he had said. I want to prevent World War III. And the way we do that is by bringing people together through shared purpose. And that was the impetus for his recommendation to President Kennedy, which became the Peace Corps, which really is about bringing people together through shared purpose, and then in running the Aspen Institute for roughly its first 25 years. So I grew up with that. And then my parents were sort of small scale entrepreneurs, but also very much sort of checked out and were very focused on self-awareness, consciousness as members of the Tibetan Buddhist community in the US. So I grew up very much around the Tibetan Buddhist community, which there's a lot of emphasis just on this idea of like being conscious, which I think a lot of what purpose is about that level of personal consciousness. So I really grew up with these role models around impact and consciousness that I feel, I don't think I appreciated as a child, but now I realize how much of a privilege it was to be able to have that kind of a family. So that's sort of the initial piece. And I can go on from there. Just want to take your lead.
No. Please continue. This is absolutely awesome. So you kind of come from that. And then what happens?
So I started on my own personal entrepreneurship sort of journey. Actually, it was not a social impact business, but it was a passion project, which is a baseball card dealership in high school, which was in Detroit. And it was this amazing experience of just learning about like how to build something and how to interact with customers and how to be able to communicate and engage with people who are very different from yourself. And that was sort of the start of my entrepreneurial journey. Created a program as an undergrad at the University of Michigan, taking college students out to the local prisons to teach creative writing, which again, to me was about bridging two different worlds through a meaningful interaction. And I just loved doing that. It was way better than anything else I did as an undergrad. Graduated from college and decided I wanted to work in education because I was so excited about the fact that I'd created this service learning experience that everyone said was their favorite class, despite the fact that I was not a professor. I was a fellow student. I was like, I want to make an impact on education. And I went to Chicago, started working in two small nonprofits doing work in education, and just got frustrated as hell by the lack of thinking, scaled thinking, the lack of abundance mindset, and the amount of scarcity mindset. And just realized that, in my early 20s, I could not operate in a world in which that kind of scarcity mindset ruled the roost, I think is the expression. So I moved to Silicon Valley, where my family was in Palo Alto in 97, and started working in tech. Did that for two different startups where we went from under 10 employees to over 200. And it was this incredible experience of just learning how organizations scale, what it looks like to think with abundance instead of scarcity. Sometimes too much abundance in the case of tech startups in terms of the assumption around success. And after doing that for 5 years and just seeing that growth, I realized like I want to go back and figure out how to bring this mindset to the nonprofit sector. And I started just going around talking to nonprofits about, what do you need? How can I be helpful? And that's where the idea for the Taproot Foundation emerged, is that none of them wanted to hire me. They're all like, you're awesome, but like you're not, like we don't have headcount for someone like you. Like you don't fit in to like our model. But could you build us a website? Could you help us with our branding? Could you help us with our HR strategy? Could you help us with X, Y, and Z? And I was like, oh, like I've got a lot of friends that could do all that work, and there's so much need for it. What if we could find a way to create a scalable mechanism for business professionals to use their professional skills instead of doing traditional volunteering and actually build the capacity of the nonprofit sector? And fast forward a dozen years, Taproot was in 7 locations across the US, 30 affiliates around the world. And we had built, been a catalyst for about a $15 billion a year marketplace for pro bono service in the US. That was an incredible experience. Probably still the best job I've ever had, just because the people you got to work with were so amazing. And the team that we built was so phenomenally inspiring. And then, as you shared, after that, I took a moment to say, do I want to continue down this path and be one of those nonprofit leaders who's at the same organization their whole life, or do I want to actually try something else? And decided for the latter and wrote The Purpose Economy, inspired by what I was seeing about all these business professionals donating, 5 to 10 hours a week on top of their full-time jobs, and realizing if you think about that in economic terms, there's clearly some demand here that's not being met, and that people are willing to spend their most precious resource, their time, to get. And that really sort of sparked the idea for the purpose economy, as well as my uncle's work at Stanford, where he had coined the term information economy and had done his dissertation on that topic. Really sparked the idea of maybe this is, as you said, Akhtar, like the next era in our economy where purpose is the driving force of value creation. And just had a great experience traveling the world, keynoting, sort of inspiring people to say, what if this is where we are right now? Purpose economy. How do we need to change our products? How do we change the workplace? How do we change our cities? It was this incredible experience. And while I was doing that, we raised venture funding to build a technology to power that, and had the journey of building a venture-backed company, but just sold about 4 or 5 months ago. And then since then, I've been sort of working on some new ventures, but I'll pause there. It's a lot of story.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I do want our listeners to hear about your new venture, but I want to kind of frame it into this whole conversation on purpose.
Yeah.
So you, again, just briefly, given your background, why do you believe purpose is important for everyone to have?
I think just the biology is just basic. Like, I think it's very clear that we as human beings need to feel like we're adding value to the world. I think it's part of our need to be able to belong and to be part of a tribe, is that we need to feel like we're creating value and that we're doing something that's like truly using our best skills, our best strengths in the world. Like, we need that to feel sense of belonging. We need to get that to feel safe in the tribe in which we operate. So I think just at a very basic biological level, like, we have that need. And then I think about it in terms of how do we scale a moral society? I think it was easy to be moral when you've got a group of 4 or 5 people and like in the woods, and sort of think about like, how do you norm around values? But when we are populations of billions of people, if we don't have a society in which people are operating from purpose and from their values, society is not sustainable. We just fundamentally cannot operate in a moral way at that scale without people being conscious and being aligned with the impact they want to make in the world.
So now you've kind of gone through this transition phase, and over the last year or so, you've been kind of delving deep into trying to figure out what's next and what's important. And I think your own purpose has kind of driven you to come to what you believe now is necessary. So share a little bit about that, to where you want to go.
Yeah, and I've shared this quickly before that. I think when I left my last company about 2 years ago, I was burnt out. Like, I was really burnt out. I think this is the side of purpose that we don't talk about as much. It's just when you're driven and you're like, have to make something happen, how all consuming that is, and the impact it had on my social life, on my health, et cetera. It took me about a year to just decompress from being a CEO of purpose-driven startups for 25 years. Like, it just took a while to get that out of my system, and to refine myself and what matters to me. Did a bunch of fun projects, during that year. Started some organizations that I'm not running, but it's got started. Doing a purpose-driven leadership program Latin America, organization called board.dev, which is about getting tech execs onto nonprofit boards. So continue to do some work, but it was not, I knew I didn't want to commit to something full time until I was past that point of burnout. And that happened earlier this year where I finally sort of felt like, okay, I'm grounded enough. I can breathe. I can operate in the world in a way that makes sense again. And looked at, as a social entrepreneur, what is the greatest challenge in the world today? Like, what is our biggest existential threat? And I think the knee-jerk reaction is like climate change. But when I actually thought about it even more deeply, even with climate change, we're not making progress on climate change unless we come together as a people. If we don't have social cohesion, if we don't have social connection, we're not going to be able to address the presenting symptoms in our society. And also looking at it from like a personal level and at a social level, and from a health perspective, the loneliness epidemic is literally killing people. And it is also just completely fraying our sense of society to have people that are so isolated. We've got in the US, like 44 million people are very lonely. 22 million Americans say they have no good friends. When you have a society where that's happening, it has such a ripple effect of pain for the individual and society. And we simply can't move forward as a society if we don't address the fact that so many people are isolated and are starting to operate out of distrust and fear, are starting to find their actual psyche degraded through that process. What really struck me was like the thing I need to focus on next is how to reverse the decline in social connection in our country, because that's at the foundation of everything else. And have started on this journey of figuring out like, how do we address that? And the major initial aha I had was just, this is the number one issue, I would say, in Seattle, in the United States, and frankly, around the world. And yet there is no infrastructure in our society for social connection. So here we have the biggest issue and we have no way of addressing it. It's like if forest fires were the biggest risk to your village, but you're like, let's not do anything about it. We'll just, if one happens, we'll try to figure out what to do. Like, it's wildly irresponsible as a society to not have infrastructure for our top need. So what I've set out on is founding the US Chamber of Connection to be the organization that can start to build that infrastructure for the US and then hopefully inspire it around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, there are so many people I meet are lonely. And in the US, I mean, middle-aged men are the most loneliest of all. And then they find these different corners online in which they can form connections, which kind of then leads to this maddening echo chamber of conversations that actually drive us apart rather than bring us together.
That's right.
So what you're doing is just absolutely awesome. So let me ask you, as we wind down this conversation, to share with our listeners your one golden nugget, a word of wisdom that you live by that you think our listeners should know.
So many different nuggets, but I think given the work I'm doing right now, I think the gold nugget is like focus on who. I think a lot of times we focus on what we want to do or why we want to do it, which I've certainly been an advocate for the why with purpose, but really focusing on like, who is it that you want to spend your life with? Who do you want to be working with? What are the values? What are the types of people that you want to actually be engaging with? And to really invest in who you're spending your life with. Because I think too often we focus on the activities. We're not focused on the who. And then we wake up and we find ourselves incredibly lonely and the work isn't as successful because it wasn't with the right people. So I think that my one gold nugget would be, let's focus on the who. And really take stock of the who in your life now and where you want to go to build the who that is going to be most fulfilling for you.
I mean, this is very fascinating, right? I mean, you kind of talked about it in your work also, is that we've spent way too much time focusing on the what and the how and not on the why and the who.
Yep.
And that if we can actually focus on the why and the who, then I think you start getting it more people-centered and including the we, which is the collective good, the common good, and moving away from the self-centered approach to just the me, which is important. But how do we actually focus on the who, which I think is just an absolutely fantastic note to end on. So again, purpose is that renewable source of energy that drives humanity forward. Continue to focus on the why and the who,